Okay, guys, welcome back into Legacy. So today I'm going to hit the last video in the hero system run, and we're going to talk about combat, how to enter combat, how phases work, how presence attacks work, and mostly how basic combat works. I'm not going to get into all the details on combat because there are a lot of other rules in here that I could get into about multi-weapons, using spread attacks, all that stuff that's just going to complicate and make this a little more complicated than it needs to be. You just know that all that stuff is covered in this book right here, which is Combat and Adventuring. It's the second book to the core system. It's also covered pretty well in the Hero Basic rule book. But for this, we're just going to cover presence attacks. We're going to cover how speed works, how phases work, and then, like I said, basic combat. So I'm going to start with speed and phases, because that's where everything comes down to. So when you enter combat in this game, you go to what are called phases. There's 12 phases in a turn. Each one represents about 5 seconds. Each turn represents about 1 minute. So each phase equals about 5 seconds. So what happens is your character is going to have a number of phases equal to his speed. The faster you are, the more phases you act in, just so you know. Let me go back to this page real quick and I'll give you an example. So say you have a character speed 4, he'll act in phase 3, 6, 9, and 12. He'll have 4 actions in a turn. And each of those phases you get to take either 1 full phase action or 2 half phase actions. I'm not going to get the list of all what the different phase actions are and all that. Again, that just complicates this video. Just know you can take 2 half phase actions, 1 full phase action when you're in that phase. Half phase actions are things like movement, and then things like full phase actions. I believe most attacks are full phase actions, or they may be half phase actions. Again, I have to look that again to be 100% sure. Like I said, I'm trying not to complicate this video more than I have to. So that's speed and that's phases. Speed and phases is very important to this game because that's how you're going to do things in the turn. Once you're inside of a phase, phases are broken down further by the speed, by the dexterity of the characters involved in that phase. So say you're on phase 3, your character has speed 4, so you're in phase 3, you have a dexterity of 20, you act at dex 20, versus somebody who may have like dex 15 or a dex 30. They would act before or after you, depending on. And if there's ties among player characters, of course, you can kind of choose who goes when and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing against that. Generally speaking, the way that I handle things like that, if there's a tie between monsters and player characters, I would allow player characters to go first. So yada, 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 phases. That's the entirety of how initiative works in this game. You go to turns, then you go to phases, then you go to dexterity. Those are the 3 steps. There you go. Okay, so those are the 2 most basic parts of combat. Then you get into things like presence attacks. Presence attacks are actually important in this game because what presence attacks do is presence attacks allow you to, in combat, or sometimes out of combat, but specifically for in combat maneuvers. I don't want my cats on me right now. They allow you to awe or humble an opponent. I just said I don't want you up here. Come on, get on my shoulder, stupid cat. And what you do is you get a die 6 for every, I believe it's every 3 points, every 5 points of presence. Every 5 points of presence, you get 1d6. You roll those numbers of d6s. If you roll greater than the opponent's presence, you do something special. And then it depends on how high you roll. So, for example, if you equal the presence, they're impressed. He hesitates enough so the attacker may act before him this phase or receives +5 presence only for the purposes of resisting contrary presence attacks made that phase. So if you presence attack somebody, you can literally cause them to act after you. If you go really high, you start getting really ridiculous. If somehow or another you get +30 of their presence, so you have really low presence and you have a really high presence attack. Target is cowed. He may surrender, run away, or faint. He is at 0 DCV and will nearly always follow commands. If he's friendly, he becomes inflamed and will follow characters in any danger, comply with virtually any request, or obey virtually any order. The chances of you getting that are very, 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 very slim. Presence attacks seem very complicated on their face, but they're not again, like most of what we've gone through with Hero, Hero is not as complicated as it looks on its face. Yes, it's a lot of rules. Yes, it's a huge second set of books. Yes, it's like 700 pages. But guys, a lot of that is powers and power creation stuff. And it's a lot of it, that first book is skill description, things like that. The rules book is only about 200 something pages, 300 something pages for combat and adventuring. And it covers a lot of the especially things like using multi-attacks and things like that. So no, this system is not hard to understand. That literally, that's presence attacks. I just covered presence attacks in what, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. Presence attacks are very easy to use as long as you can justify using them. Instead of having skills like intimidate, you use presence attacks. That's what you do. Okay. That being said, now we're going to get into the meat of this. This does get a little bit weird. This is where people will tell you, Hero's got some weird rolls. And yes, it does. Okay, so how do you determine what your OCV is? So your OCV, so in 5th edition, it used to be derived. So I'm going to skip the part about determining your OCV. But for some reason, if for some reason you have skills that allow you to get bonuses with weapons or whatever. So it says +1 OCV when using blank. So say you have +1 OCV using guns, you would add it after you determine your OCV. So if you buy an OCV, say OCV 4, OCV 5, and you get +1 with guns, your OCV is treated as if it's 6 when you're using a gun. Really not that complicated. I mean, like I said, this gets really complicated at times. So just keep that in mind. It can get as complicated as you want it to get. So like combat maneuvers, I'm sure I'm telling you all this right. I won't lie to you poor fools. So so this is where it kind of starts getting weird, guys. So what you're going to do is when you're looking to hit, okay, so you've determined your OCV, say you have an OCV 6 because you're using a gun. Again, not hard to figure out. Oh, okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to add 11 to the roll. So you're going to roll 3d6, add 11 to it. Really simple. And then you subtract so you add 11 to your OCV. So if you have an OCV 5, in this case we said OCV 6. So OCV 6 plus 11 is 17. You roll, you subtract the roll from that, and that tells you the DCV you hit. It sounds complicated again, so let's do it in real time. So we're rolling dice. We have an OCV in combat of 17, and we roll a 7. So we roll a 7. We hit any DCV 10 or less. Well, I mean, that's not very... It sounds so much more complicated than it is. If you succeed, you do damage. So the damage section is a little weird. And that is the basics of combat. Like I said, there's optional stuff in there, like do you do knockback? Do you have endurance cost to the attack you're making? All that stuff. So doing damage, should I get to the damage section here? On the damage section here. Whole section in here about dealing damage. 96. Make sure you get this right because it's not hard to do. So when you're doing damage in this game, you're going to deal damage. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to roll. For normal damage, the total on the dice is the amount of stun damage the attack does. Okay, so say you have a weapon that does 3d6 damage. You roll 3d6. 6. Oh, great. Okay. And you get a total of 17. Great. You did 17 stun damage to the opponent. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pick up the same dice. You're going to count them differently for how much body damage you do for normal damage. Normal damage, so if the die shows a 1, it does no damage. If you do a 2 through a 5 on the die, it does 1 point of body damage. If it's a 6, it does 2 points. So in the above circumstances, say you roll 6, 6, 5, you would do 4, 5 points of body damage, which is pretty substantial, actually, on a 3d6. Then you can get in things like killing damage. Damage for killing damage, damage attacks is determined differently from normal damage. The total of the dice is the number of body applied to the damage. To determine the stun done, the character rolls a stun multiplier, 1/2 d6, and multiplies the result by the amount of body damage done. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to pick up a d6, you're going to roll a d3, and you're going to times the amount of body that you do by that number. So if you roll times 3, then you're going to do, say we roll a 2d6 killing attack, we get 9. We roll a times 3 body multiplier, we do 27 stun damage. Again, guys, these numbers, it seems very complicated. And like I said, this is without getting into all the details and the dirty work. And if you're just punching somebody, you do damage based on your strength. It's strength divided by 5. So, and that's combat in Hero. Without, like I said, without getting into all the meaty, nasty stuff like combat maneuvers and how you grapple with people, and because that stuff is all superfluous to the basic roles. I'm just trying to explain the basics of Hero without overcomplicating it. But hopefully you guys learned something from this, and hopefully you understand that this is why I've been trying to say from the beginning. Hero is not as complicated as it appears from the beginning. It seems like it's a lot more complicated than it is, because people tend to overcomplicate it because of the power creation system and everything else. And as I did in the video yesterday, creating a character, hero creation is not that complicated. Even if I wanted to build my own powers, it's not that complicated. I can build a very basic power pretty quickly, especially if I have a sheet like what I was using yesterday with a powers calculator on it. It's really not that hard. I don't understand the urge. People say hero is so complicated. Why is it so hard? It's not. It's really just a 3d6 roll under system. Doing damage can be a little wonky, and the whole weapon plus OCV minus a roll thing does throw people off at first. But once you start getting into it, it just clicks, because you never change that 11 plus OCV number unless you're switching weapons or you get additional boost from things like if you're throwing additional dice or additional OCV because the person's on the ground or the person's tied up, or that starts getting the more complicated parts of combat where you start getting bonuses based on circumstance. You take an aim action, things like that. All that stuff matters, but as far as basics of combat, no, it's not going to change all that much. DCVs can change by getting cover and all that kind of stuff, and having shields, and certain powers can give you additional DCV or additional physical defense. And just so you know, your physical defense reduces all damage you have incoming. So that is something real quick. Let me go in there and talk about damage and damage reduction, because damage reduction is actually pretty it's adding damage, yada yada yada. Damage attacks with advantages. So if you take a normal damage, both normal defenses and resistance defenses protect from normal damage. Character's main form of normal defenses are natural PD and ED. These can be supplemented, but protects against normal physical damage. ED protects against energy. So like if somebody's trying to hit you with a power bolt or something like that. Subtract the character's total alcohol defense from total stun done by the attacks, and again from total body done. That's literally how easy it is. So if you have a physical defense of 7, and you take 12 stun damage, you take a total of 5. Wow, woo, really complicated, right? And then again, if you only take 5 body and you have a 7 physical defense, you take nothing. Congratulations. And then killing damage only is preventable by resistant defenses. So resistant defenses are typically gained through powers or armor, things like that. you automatically take 1 stun for every 1 body damage that gets through your defense. He can recover stun normally. He doesn't have to heal the body damage first. So basically, if for some reason, if you take body damage but don't take stun, for whatever reason, you still take stun. Which makes sense because you just took trauma. There you go, guys. Like I said, I think I covered the basics of combat for this system in 15 minutes. And hopefully you guys got something out of it. I'm not sure what game I'm going to deep dive next. I have not made up my mind on that yet. I have so many games lying around that need deep dives. But for sure, Hero was a good one to do because I think it's a misunderstood game. Anyways, guys, thoughts, comments, questions, concerns below. Be happy to address them if anyone has any. As always, just follow the core rules there that I have for. Sorry, cat stepping on my keyboard. Just trying to go lay in her spot behind my chair. Got to clean that spot out again because I knocked a bunch of stuff off the top of the TV stand. But if you got anything you want to say, just don't leave diatribes. Don't make personal attacks. Don't ad hominem. Don't pick fights. Other than that, guys, we hope you guys have fun, and we do hope to see you guys on the game table at some point.